Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something massive. We are diving into the sweeping, almost unbelievable rhythms of Chinese history. We're talking about 5,000 years of empires rising, fracturing, and coming back together. When you look at the sheer scale of China's past, it's not just a bunch of dates to memorize. It is this breathtaking, continuous story of human resilience and absolute ambition. So let's get right into it. To guide us through all this, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the dawn of Chinese civilization, then look at unification and the first empires. From there, we hit the golden ages of innovation, move into conquests and last dynasties, and finally, wrap up with the modern era. Okay, but before we jump into the timeline, there's one absolutely crucial concept we have to understand: the mandate of heaven. The Zhao dynasty introduced this early on, and honestly, it is the anchor for everything we're about to talk about. It explains exactly why these empires cyclically rise and inevitably fall. See, a ruler doesn't just get to sit on the throne forever by divine right. If they get corrupt, or even if terrible things like famines and floods strike, people saw that as a sign that heaven literally revoked their mandate. Because of that, rebellion was completely justified, which would birth a brand new dynasty. It's literally the heartbeat of the dynastic cycle. Section 1. Dawn of Chinese civilization. From early agriculture to philosophical foundations. We start right at the cradle of civilization, along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. First up is the early Tu culture around 1900 BC, which a lot of historians connect to the heavily debated, maybe even legendary Zhao dynasty. Then we hit the Shang dynasty in 1600 BC. And the Shan are a big deal because this is where we actually find the earliest surviving written Chinese, those famous divinations carved right into oracle bones. After that, the Zhao dynasty steps in and rules for a staggering 8 centuries. But eventually, their central power just completely collapsed, dragging the whole region into the brutal violence of the Warring States period. But here's the wild part. What was the unexpected byproduct of all that chaotic violence? It sparked this brilliant axial age of philosophy. Because the world was practically falling apart, the most brilliant minds of the time were desperately looking for solutions. And out of that chaos, we got Confucianism with its deep focus on social order, Taoism emphasizing harmony with nature, and legalism, which was all about strict laws and harsh punishments. And these aren't just dusty ancient ideas. They literally laid the cultural foundations that still deeply influence Chinese society today. Moving into Chapter 2, Unification and First Empires. The brutal Qin and the Golden Han. So, out of the ashes of the Warring States period, one single, incredibly formidable power finally steps up to create the first true Chinese empire. That's the Qin dynasty in 221 BC. It was a really brief, really harsh unification, but it decisively put an end to centuries of nonstop conflict. And that brief spark is exactly what paved the way for the Han dynasty. The Han ushered in a 4-century-long classical golden age so foundational that, believe it or not, the dominant ethnic group in China today is still known as the Han Chinese. 4,250. That number represents the staggering miles of imperial highways built by Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. Even though his dynasty lasted barely 15 years, his impact was just unbelievable. He didn't just build roads and start linking up early versions of the Great Wall. He actually standardized laws, weights, measures, and most importantly, created a single written script to connect a massive, incredibly diverse realm. When we put these two foundational empires side by side, the contrast is practically night and day. You've got the Qin, right? They ruled through the strict, uncompromising philosophy of legalism. We're talking fear, forced labor, and absolute control to glue the state together. It worked to unify things, sure, but it burned out incredibly fast. Then the Han dynasty takes over and totally shifts gears. They thrive by promoting the stability of Confucianism. They opened up the famous Silk Road to trade with the West and oversaw huge technological leaps, like inventing paper. Because of this approach, the Han lasted for 400 years, making it an empire basically on par with the Roman Empire in both its scale and its longevity. Section 3. Golden Ages of Innovation. Rebirth, cosmopolitan wealth, and technological leaps. Well, after centuries of disunity following the fall of the Han, that dynastic cycle we talked about struck again with almost eerie symmetry. The short-lived Sui dynasty acted a whole lot like the Qin. They used massive amounts of labor to build the Grand Canal, successfully reuniting the North and the South. And that set the perfect stage for the Tang dynasty's cultural zenith. During the Tang, the capital city of Chang'an was literally the largest city in the world.
After a very brief fracture, the Song dynasty took the reins, kicking off an economic boom on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
Just to put things into perspective, during this era, China's population absolutely exploded, soaring past 100 million people. And the stuff they were inventing, they were utilizing the foundational technologies of the modern world way before anyone else. We are talking about gunpowder for the very first true military firearms. We're talking the magnetic compass to guide these giant wooden trade ships. They even came up with the historically first use of paper money, plus movable type printing and complex astronomical clocks. Their science and commercial tech vastly outpaced the rest of the globe. So with all that immense wealth, a booming population, and advanced naval power loaded with incendiary weapons, it begs a pretty massive question. How on earth did the world's most advanced civilization ultimately collapse? Which brings us to part 4, conquests and last dynasties, Mongol dominance, Ming restoration, and Manchu expansion. The answer to that collapse actually lies far beyond the Great Wall. Nomadic forces from the northern steppes swept down, and for the very first time, all of China was conquered by an ethnic minority. This was the Mongols, who established the Yuan dynasty in 1271. Eventually, a massive peasant uprising managed to drive them out, and the Ming dynasty briefly restored Han Chinese rule. But, you guessed it, the cycle turned once again in 1644. Another minority group from the northeast, the Manchus, breached the walls and established the Qing dynasty, which would turn out to be the final imperial house of China. 1 million. That staggering number was the size of the standing army for the Ming dynasty. Having just overthrown the Mongols, the Ming were, understandably, fiercely protective. They used this absolutely massive force to lock down their borders. They built the iconic, modern brick and stone version of the Great Wall that we picture today. And early on, they even projected incredible naval power all the way across the Indian Ocean with their legendary treasure fleets. Looking closely at these two conquest dynasties, they left behind vastly different legacies. The Yuan integrated China into this giant global Mongol empire, creating the Pax Mongolica. This made the Silk Road incredibly safe for trade. In fact, this is exactly when Marco Polo arrived. But it wasn't all good news. It brought brutal warfare, the plague, and some massive population declines. The Qing, on the flip side, pushed China's borders out to their greatest historical extent ever. By the 18th century, they were ruling roughly a third of the entire world's population. But ultimately, they tragically collided with Western imperialism and deep internal decay throughout the 19th century. To really grasp the scale of the Qing's late-stage fracture, just look at this number, 20 million. That is the estimated death toll from the Taiping Rebellion in the mid-19th century. It was an explosive, devastating civil war, driven by a religious movement that just tore through southern China. It still remains one of the absolute deadliest conflicts in all of human history. It permanently crippled imperial authority and was a glaring sign that the Qing were rapidly losing that all-important mandate of heaven. Section 5. The Modern Era. The Fall of Emperors and the Rise of Republics. So that 2,000-year dynastic cycle officially shattered in the early 20th century. After the 1911 Xinhai Revolution, the Republic of China was proclaimed, bringing an end to imperial rule once and for all. But unfortunately, peace did not follow. China endured the chaotic warlord era, followed by the horrific devastation of World War II and the Japanese occupation. And even after the global war ended, a bitter, bloody civil war resumed between nationalist and communist forces. This ultimately split the nation in 1949. Following that 1949 split, we start seeing two separate, parallel trajectories. Over on the mainland, Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China, or PRC. Governed by the Chinese Communist Party, it went through decades of sweeping and often deadly mass campaigns before eventually transitioning to a mixed market economy. Meanwhile, Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China, the ROC, retreated to the island of Taiwan. They operated under martial law for decades before making major democratic reforms in the 1990s. This is such a critical historical juncture because historically, both entities claimed sole legitimacy over all of China. And that sets up the complex geopolitical realities we're looking at today. As we hit the late 20th century, rapid modernization really defined both sides of the strait. Starting in the late 70s, Deng Xiaoping initiated economic reforms in the PRC that opened up markets, lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and turned the mainland into the absolute global economic powerhouse we know today.
At the very same time, Taiwan underwent its own profound transition. The ROC ended martial law and held its first direct presidential election in 1996, becoming a thriving multi-party democracy.
And that brings us right to the end of our journey today. We've traced it all: the rise of Bronze Age kings, the sheer unifying terror of the Qin, the golden, brilliant innovations of the Song, right down to the fractured realities of our modern era. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really think about. How do those deep, continuous rhythms of the dynastic cycle and that ancient, ever-present concept of the mandate of heaven continue to shape and echo in China's trajectory on the world stage right now in the 21st century? Thank you so much for exploring this with me.